Joining us now to break all of this down is Dr. Sebastian Gorka, former Deputy Assistant to the President and our former National Security Editor here at Breitbart News, as well as one of the leading voices in the MAGA, Make America Great Again movement. Dr. Gorka, thanks for joining us this morning on Breitbart News Saturday.
My pleasure, Matt. What a news week.
I know, and we could spend 45 minutes just talking about what happened last night. But that's where I want to start. I think the bigger story last night isn't the CNN story about charges being filed. We've kind of been expecting that for a while. I think the bigger story is the revelation that the Washington Free Beacon and Paul Singer were behind this Fusion GPS effort before Hillary Clinton was. What do you make of that revelation?
I think we now have the smoking gun that really explains why Donald Trump, the complete and utter outsider, won the presidential election last November 8th. I mean, think about what we just found out, that a billionaire hedge funder who was the key backer for Marco Rubio, his Gang of Eight, his immigration amnesty team, that individual through the Free Beacon was the first person to pay for opposition research against President Trump as an alleged conservative, as an alleged member of the right. So, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's only an accident that Donald J. Trump was the Republican nominee for president. He is Donald Trump. He is the base. He is he was the American nominee for the presidential election, and he was running against the establishment on the left and the right. And in many cases, it's the GOP rhinos that were a bigger obstacle to him than the left. Because, look, Matt, we expect the left to do what they do, right? Because they're the left. Right. But we don't expect the GOP to be sabotaging their own side the way this man Singer and the Free Beacon did. And that's why Mitch McConnell looks worried. And you know what? He should look worried.
Right. And so now, Dr. Gore, I want to read a couple of different statements. This first one is from Jack Langer. He's the spokesman for the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And this is his statement. He gave this to us and a number of other news organizations last night when the news broke that the Washington Free Beacon, which of course is funded by Singer, is behind this. This is a quote from Jack Langer. Quote, "The Washington Free Beacon has issued a statement asserting that it had no involvement with Christopher Steele or the dossier he compiled from Russian sources. The Beacon has agreed to cooperate with the House Intelligence Committee to help the committee verify this assertion." Now, here's the statement from the Washington Free Beacon. And this is... I have to find that. Hang on a sec. I'll come back to that in a minute. But it's significant, I think, and I think that we may be seeing a time here where. What do you think, Dr. Gorka? Do you think it's time for some of these folks, like the editors in leadership at the Washington Free Beacon, as well as Mr. Singer, the main funder of that organization, to maybe be called up before the House Intelligence Committee and other committees to testify about their involvement here?
These are really complex stories, and you are the master of the 5,000-word expose on Breitbart. So let's try and clarify for the listeners what's going on here. There's story number one, that we have so-called conservatives that are using an organization, Fusion GPS, that is known to have very shady contacts in the intelligence community, that hires people with explicitly good relations in Moscow, such as Christopher Steele, that you have a conservative news organ working with companies like Fusion GPS is issue number one. Then we have to look at the dossier. What the Free Beacon says is the dodgy dossier had nothing to do with them. That came later. That came from another client to Fusion GPS, namely Hillary Clinton, Hillary Clinton's lawyers, and the DNC. At this point, we have the issue of the left doing something much worse than opposition research. Here we have $8 million. Let's think that in for a second. $8 million being paid for a dossier that we now know was composed of fabricated disinformation from Russian sources that was used to besmirch the president and his campaign, and then this is the nuclear bomb. A dossier that was used by James Comey as the director of the FBI when he briefed President Trump on its contents, and within an hour of that briefing had been leaked to CNN, and then James Comey later testified, after he was righteously fired by the president, that he leaked his official documents written on government hardware to the press explicitly to trigger the impaneling of a special prosecutor, his best friend, Robert Mueller, to investigate the president. That is banana republic weaponization of disinformation and weaponization of federal law enforcement. So the right, backers on the right, like Singer, organs like the Free Beacon, have to answer for what they've done to undermine their own side. But there's the much larger issue of Russian propaganda being used by the director of the FBI to impanel a special prosecutor to attack a sitting president. That's the enormity of the situation, Matt.
Yeah, no, and Dr. Gorka, I think this whole thing, what you just broke down there, literally is the deep state, right? Like, we've been talking about the fact that there is a deep state in Washington, a power structure, so to speak, that has existed under Republican and Democrat presidents for the last several decades here, with power in the military, intelligence, and law enforcement communities, as well as in the political elites, and that they all work together to protect themselves and try to stop outsiders like a Donald Trump from ascending into high office. What you're describing here sounds like the deep state. I mean, it sounds like this is exactly what we've been warning about. This is the political class doing their best to try to stop the people from retaking control of their government.
There's a massive disconnect here between people who are supposed to be serving the nation and their belief that they are above the people who they serve. I saw this when I worked in the White House. I saw this in the NSC. I'd be at meetings regularly, and you'd meet with high-ranking individuals who are ostensibly meant to be civil servants. They're not political appointees like me. I was a politically commissioned officer of the president. These people have been in the system for 20, 30 years as civil servants. And they disagreed with the president, and they see him not as their president, and they believe that their personal political identity justifies their undermining of a duly elected commander-in-chief. And yes, I mean, I don't like the phrase deep state. I prefer the phrase permanent state, but it is a massive, massive problem. And I'm going to say this now, on the record. I had a senior FBI person tell me when we were in the West Wing, when we were working in the White House, that the seventh floor, meaning the leadership of the FBI, under the last director, under Comey, looked at the White House of Donald J. Trump as the enemy. Now, we need to let that sink in, because it's not the director of the FBI who's the most senior law enforcement official in America. It's not even the attorney general. People need to read the Constitution. They need to read administrative law. The senior law enforcement officer of the United States of America is the sitting president. And his FBI leadership looks at him as the enemy. That is the republic being undermined at its very core.
Now, Dr. Gorka, in addition to all of that, this Paul Singer character, in addition to his funding for the Washington Free Beacon, is one of the biggest donors to many of these establishment Republicans who are standing in the way of President Trump's agenda. He is the biggest donor to Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, Mitch McConnell. He's one of Mitch McConnell's biggest donors. He's donated to Roger Wicker. He's donated to Bobby Corker. He's donated to, I mean, literally go down the list of his donors, and we're going to flesh this out on Breitbart over the coming days and weeks here and months ahead. But do you think it's time that these folks start giving their money back to Paul Singer? If they really stand with President Trump and his agenda, I don't think you can take money from somebody like Singer after this revelation. or you can keep it if you took it.
Matt, that's never going to happen. But these revelations should help everybody understand, all the listeners, and Americans in general should understand that at the highest level of the United States political elite, there's no left or right. There's just one elite. You look at the open border policies. What Singer was funding through Rubio and others was exactly the same vision that Hillary Clinton was privately giving speeches about when she said to those bankers, do you remember when she said, we need to have a borderless Western Hemisphere, meaning no borders between America and anybody else, all the way from South America up to Canada, no borders. There's no such thing as America. America is a bad thing. That's what people like Singer believe. That's what people like Singer's clients, if you will, in the political elite believe. It's one group. And that's why the only person who could have won the election last year was Donald J. Trump, because he's not beholden to that class. He believes that America still means something. He believes in national security. And also, I mean, what did Singer say? Singer in 2016, so just very recently, he said that Donald Trump's economic policies would be a disaster for the United States of America. That's what Singer believes. He actually gave that in an interview to, I think, MSNBC. What's happened in the last 9 months, Matt, to the U.S. economy? I mean, I was on Fox Business lately, and I said the economy, the stock market, has just broken the 27th record since January the 20th. And the host, super guy, Charles Payne, said, no. The 47th record, not 27th, the 47th record. We have had second quarter 3% GDP growth. But at the same time, Paul Krugman, what does he predict? He predicted a Nobel Prize laureate for economics. That if Donald J. Trump wins the election, the stock market will crash and likely not recover. That is a verbatim quote. The stock market will not recover. There is the elite. They agree with each other, with the rare exception. There are great people out there on the Hill. You know who they are. The Trent Franks of this world are out there. But the rest is a schlep that agrees with each other. And whether they have R or D behind their name is irrelevant.
Now, speaking of one of those people, Dr. Gorka, Paul Singer was the biggest donor behind Marco Rubio's presidential campaign. And in addition to funding all sorts of different amnesty efforts and so on and so forth, but he was the biggest donor behind Rubio's campaign. Now, earlier this week, before it became clear that Singer was the main guy behind this Fusion GPS effort, before it shifted over to the Clinton campaign after the primaries, but through the Washington Free Beacon, which kind of acted like a, and look, there are some decent folks who work at the Free Beacon. I am friends with a couple of them. There are some decent reporters and editors there. The Free Beacon was kind of like Paul Singer's pass-through, right? Like it was kind of like Paul Singer's pass-through. But it's sad that the good people that work there have been tarnished with this, and their reputations are being dragged through the mud right now. And I hope that they find future employment at other places. But ultimately, Dr. Gorka, Rubio was asked earlier in the week by CNN, of all places, about whether or not he was behind it or if he knew. And I want to read you a couple of quotes. He said that as far as whether it was my campaign, it wasn't, and I'll tell you why. I was running for president. I was trying to win. If I had anything against Donald Trump that was relevant and credible and politically damaging, I would have used it. I didn't have it. And then the second quote from Rubio is, quote, I don't know who it was. The one thing we do know, this thing about the dossier you're discussing, all those press accounts, and I'm just going off press accounts, they all make it abundantly clear that the work that Mr. Steele did on that dossier didn't even start until April or May or June after the Republican primary was over. So that was the DNC and that was the Clinton campaign, end quote. Now, we went to Rubio's office last night, Dr. Gorka, and we asked him if he regrets accepting financial backing from Singer, whether he thinks what Singer did was acceptable in funding the Fusion GPS people, and whether he thinks Singer should testify before the Congress about his involvement in this matter. Rubio's office didn't answer those questions, but a spokeswoman told us, quote, other than the Clinton campaign, Senator Rubio and his team do not know who contracted Fusion GPS and had never even heard of them or their alleged research until it was posted online earlier this year, end quote. It seems a little bit too funky that Rubio's biggest donor, and this guy's definitely in direct contact with Marco all the time, that Rubio doesn't know the answers to these. So, Rubio is somebody who's been out there beating the drum for a Russia investigation. Well, maybe it's time that Rubio leads the call to bring Paul Singer before the Congress to testify.
Well, there's a real problem here for the Rubio campaign and for Rubio himself personally, because who is this man Singer? He's not just a billionaire hedge fund guy who says he's a conservative. I mean, this is a man who's given thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to organizations like the National Immigration Forum. Now, the National Immigration Forum is about open borders. It's an organization that receives funding from George Soros.
Right.
So how do you square the circle, Marco Rubio, with receiving funds from an individual who's working hand in glove with Soros-funded organizations that are about open borders? So it's more, Matt. It's more than just one dossier. It's more than just the story of the Free Beacon. What the listeners need to appreciate is how much all of this tells you everything you need to know about the Rhino GOP establishment. It's not about your interest. It's not about the listeners' interest. It's about Marco Rubio, the establishment, the Chamber of Commerce, open borders. That's the big story behind all of this.
100%. Dr. Gorka, where do you think this goes from here? Do you think that we see more and more of this effort that, you know what really seems like to me, Dr. Gorka? It seems like that this now demonstrates that we don't know where Never Trump ends and Hillary Clinton begins, right? Like that they were all kind of the same thing, right? So if you put this together with the top Never Trump billionaire in the country, Paul Singer, funding this effort, and then it's shifting over to the Hillary campaign after the primaries, it's as if they were working hand in glove. Never Trump and the Democrats are the same thing. They were all working together to try to undermine the president.
When Bill Kristol tweets out, okay, he actually tweeted this out recently. In a choice between Donald J. Trump and the deep state, I choose the deep state. You've got it. You nailed it. The Never Trump and the Democrats, they're the same thing now. It's one festering pool of people who want to negate the November choice made by the American people. That's what it's about. And I know, you want to talk about Rubio, you want to talk about the GOP and the rhinos, but we cannot lose sight of the real big picture. You're asking, where does this go now? We have to make sure it goes to the point where people pay the correct penalty for undermining a serving United States president through the use of enemy nations' propaganda in a weaponized form that used federal law enforcement against a serving official in the White House named Donald J. Trump. We need to get to the bottom of how federal law enforcement has been weaponized, and also, in parallel, how everybody who's investigating the president today, like Mueller, like Rosenstein, were in office when the Uranium One deal was going through, and how that corruption scandal, in which Secretary Clinton was the chairman of the CFIUS board that approved the sale of 20% of the thing we use to make nuclear weapons being sold to Russia, how these individuals let it happen. That's the massive story.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And then, and Dr. Gorka, the last thing I want to ask you is that where people have a chance to make their voice heard on this is in these upcoming midterm elections, where there's really a shot, I think, to really redo and reaffirm the message that people sent on November the 8th. They can go out there and vote for these outsiders. Like, I know you campaigned for Judge Roy Moore down in Alabama, and he's up for his special election on December 12th and is likely to defeat radical Democrat Doug Jones there. But there's an opportunity elsewhere around the country in many of these other elections, which the picture is becoming clear. And the establishment of both sides, both the establishment Republicans and the Democrats, are really coming under the gun here in these midterm elections. So what should people do to get involved and make sure their voice is heard and make sure that they get this message across again?
Yeah, this is the most important point. So 2018 will be the year when the 2018 message is taken directly to the establishment, left and right, a rhino, a never Trumper, deep state. So it's crucial that everybody listening understands this isn't a job for somebody else to do. If you want to join the teams that are supporting the president on the outside, go to MAGAcoalition.com. That's the Make America Great Again Coalition. That's the PAC that I represent. This is the PAC for the forgotten men and women that voted for Donald Trump to become president. And get involved. Make your voice heard. It doesn't matter if there's no special election, whether it's on the local, a school board. Make your voices heard. Enough is enough. Take the challenge to the establishment and make sure the spirit of November the 8th is translated into all of those elections that will be occurring in 2018.
Okay, well, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, former deputy assistant to President Trump, thank you for joining us on Breitbart News Saturday.
Thank you, Matt. God bless you and the listeners.